Hello and welcome to More Than Mondays, a podcast for believers by believers to encourage, challenge, and shift our perspective as we go throughout our week. On this week's episode, we have a friend of mine, Skyler Halovich, talking to us a little bit more about what it means to be a leader in the kingdom of heaven. I hope you enjoy.
Hey, Skyler, thank you so much for taking some time this weekend to be here with us on More Than Mondays. It's really such a privilege to be with you here. We've never officially met in person, but
I know.
I'm really excited about this
Yes.
conversation because we've been
Yes.
messaging back and forth. You're at missions.me, you're dating one of my closest friends, and knowing him, that means you're probably the number one person in the history of the world because he's the number one person in the history of the world.
That's true.
So
it's very true.
So for somebody to come in and get his attention, I know you have to be amazing. So I'm really excited about our conversation about leadership today. But before we dive into that, let's just, for my sake too, let's hear a little bit more about you. What's going on in life?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Cooper, I am so excited. This is our first real conversation. I've heard legends about you, missions.me. I've heard all the tall tales. So I feel like I know you already just through everything. So it's crazy because I feel like just this conversation right now, I feel like I've known you for years at this point. So this is really exciting to be on. And thank you for the opportunity to even be on here, not knowing a ton about me and just kind of hearing through our mutual friends about, who I am and what I've done. Like, I'm so honored that you give me the opportunity to even just come on here. And I'm super excited to share a little bit about my story and the things that I've struggled with and just have learned. And I really hope that this conversation today just brings some encouragement for people who maybe are going through some things that I've gone through, or even you've gone through in your leadership journey, because it really is a journey for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit, because again, like I said, I want to learn more about you myself. What do you like to do in your free time when you're just, which is very little at missions.me college, but when you do have it, what do you like to do?
Yeah. So I am, just a little bit backstory behind me. I'm originally from Las Vegas, Nevada. So, and it's Nevada, not Nevada. It's just so everyone's aware. Nevadans will kill you if you say it wrong. Just a little fun fact, but I'm originally from there. So I was born and raised in Sin City. And when people meet me, they think it's the wildest thing. Someone literally told me the other day, like, I always forget that you're from Las Vegas because you just don't look like someone who'd be from Las Vegas. Grew up going to church. I grew up at the same church my entire life, went most Sundays. And I really am a byproduct of that faith community. It's where I found God. It's where I found Jesus. It's where I stepped into ministry for the first time. It's where I felt called to ministry. Some of the greatest moments of my faith journey have been at that church. And so Las Vegas and that church, like, they just have a piece of my heart. And I really owe a lot to that. And then about a year ago, I felt the call to come to California, which is beautiful. I mean, come on. I live 5 minutes from the beach in Dana Point. Like, it's really not a hard thing when God tells you to live in Southern California, in a beautiful apartment. Like, it's just, you can't disagree with that. Like, no one's like, God, I don't know. Like, it's amazing. So came to California about a year ago to be a part of missions.me. And you are right. It is very busy, but it's so rewarding. But one thing that's been great about living in Southern California is I am like an explorer. I love to just experience everything that a place has to offer. I'm kind of that friend. If you go traveling with me, I will have the minutes planned out. Like, we are not going to miss a single thing. We're going to eat at this restaurant. We're going to go to this museum. Like, my friends make fun of me because I'll literally make an itinerary. Like, this is what we're going to do. And so living in Southern California, there's so much to do. So honestly, my free time, I love to just explore different parts of California. It's crazy because within an hour's drive, you can see the desert, you can see the beach, you can see the mountains. You can go to San Diego, you can go to LA. Like, there's just so much that there is to do. I'm also an avid Disney fan. And so
me too. Come on, girl.
Praises. That annual SoCal pass, it just
fire.
makes everything. We're going to have to go to Disneyland now that I know that. Next
100%.
time you're in town. Yes.
I was looking for my Disneyland pass. I have one. I have it still. It's
just
safe.
to prove it.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Once it opens up,
I'm there.
that's where we're going. Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, now that I know, it's great. Good. Yeah, I'm the same thing. And like moving to Southern California and being 30 minutes away from Disney was a game changer. So honestly, that probably too, when I have free time, that's where I spend it. Even though it's shut down right now, I'm waiting for that to open up for sure.
Thanks so much for sharing with us, and I'm really excited to go to Disney with you and Mitch. It's literally my favorite place in the world. It's so amazing. But let's jump into the conversation. Let's jump into what we're to talk about, and that's leadership. A lot of people think about leadership and process leadership and feel called to leadership in their walk with Christ. And I thought it was so important to bring you on, because I'm going to just give your accolades just for a second. You were 19 years old when you took over a young adults ministry, and that ministry grew into what I believe, I was told, 300-ish young adults while you were leading it. Is that an accurate number?
I think yes and no during certain seasons for sure, but I think more fairly like 150, 200 would be better.
150, 200. But still, I mean, that's amazing. It grew up to, even like you said, in some seasons was at that 300 number. And honestly, you took that over at 19, and at 24, you moved to a place where honestly, it could have felt like starting over. It could have felt like maybe being in this place. So, knowing that you could have held on to this position and said, I'm going to stay at this young adult and be the leader, quote unquote. What does that term leader mean to you?
Kind of like you said, I was kind of given a ministry at 19, and it wasn't something that I was expecting. It wasn't something I was anticipating. It wasn't anything that I was seeking after, and just kind of happened that there was a need that needed to be met, and I was there, and I was committed. I was ready for the vision, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I remember the first day after I had kind of stepped into that leadership role, I remember going into the church office and sitting there and just feeling so overwhelmed. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I think growing up, I always wanted to be a leader. That was something that I just kind of knew that was what I wanted to do. But I think as time has gone on, I now truly understand what leadership means, because I think at that time, I didn't necessarily know what leadership meant. I think that there's so many broad terms of what leadership can be. We have dozens, thousands of books on leadership out there, and there's so many people trying to grow to become better leaders. There's leadership conferences out there that you can attend. There's leadership podcasts. Everyone really is looking to be, how can they be the best leader that they are? And there's so many broad definitions, but what I've gained through my own personal experience, and one thing that I've learned is, especially when I was in high school and junior high, I was very active, loved to be in clubs, and was in a couple sports here and there, never like really that great, but was just a go-getter, wanted to try to just find ways that I could be involved. And at the time, even when I was serving in the church in high school, at the time, I thought being a leader meant being the best of what you were supposed to do. I thought it was maybe being the best at the task that you were given, being the best person for a job. I realized that while it's true that competency and leadership is important, it's not the most important thing. I remember my high school pastor at the time, he was kind of coaching me on how to be a leader. And one thing that he said was, leadership is really influence. And I was a little thrown back by that, because I was like, what does that mean? I do all these amazing things. I was an amazing volunteer. I was like the all-star volunteer. I showed up at 7 a.m., last one to leave. I did setup, I did tear down for a high school ministry. I was in the thing. So to me, I thought I was a good leader because I was really good at what I did. But when he said influence, I was like, whoa, what does that mean? And when I stepped into young adults ministry at 19, or I started when I was 18, but when I stepped into that leadership role at 19, I still had a little bit of that mindset of, it just meant doing well at what I was given to do. And as I've gone through this leadership journey, I agree that influence really is leadership, but I would go a step further to say that influence is how you gain leadership, but true leadership is actually representation. Because as a leader, it's not about putting the spotlight on yourself. It's not about looking at how great you are. It's actually about how you represent the people that you lead.
Wow.
And so in any way, when you're thinking about decisions that you're making, when you're thinking about the things that you're communicating, when you're thinking about the actions that you're giving, you have to think about the people that you're representing. It's not about you. It's not about making your platform bigger. It's about how do you make the people that you're leading better. And so you have to look at yourself as you are the representative for these individuals. You're the representative of the people that you lead in organizations, in ministries, in your job, anything like that. Is how can I steward these people well, and how can I lead them to know God more? Because if we're so focused on making our own platforms great, if we're so focused on making our own names great, that completely takes away the idea of why God even created leadership in the first place. The whole point of leadership in the kingdom of God is to lead people closer to Jesus. Like that's literally it. And so you're representative of that. You're representative of these people. And it's really a humbling position to take. You think about kind of the way that we describe leadership, or we see leaders, and there's amazing leaders out there who have mega platforms. They're all over social media. They have these large churches, and no doubt they're amazing leaders. But there's also a lot of leaders out there that you've never heard their names, and they're probably the best leaders out there. They don't have crazy big platforms. They don't have, over 1 million social media followers, but they lead so well, and you would never know. And so I think that's something to keep in mind is when you think about what the term leadership means.
Wow, that is so amazing. It's so true too, because as a leader, a lot of times we think about ourselves. We think about, what am I doing? How am I doing it? Am I impacting or influencing, even though that's a major part of leadership? But it's like, what are you influencing, and how are you influencing? I was talking with Janine on our podcast last week about relationship, and she was talking about relationship and influence, and what you're doing with influence, and what do you do with your influence. And as leaders, leadership is really a relationship, right? So it is a form of a relationship. So you said leading your people. How do you, in an instance where you're making decisions and making choices, what is something that you go through in your thought process when it comes to these decisions are going to affect the people I'm leading? So how do you go about making that choice, knowing that?
Yeah. That's a good question. One thing I think is really important when making a decision is there were a lot of times where I knew what I wanted, and I knew what I felt was comfortable. And there were sometimes decisions that I think I had made in the past that maybe were the decision that I wanted, because it was what I thought was the best idea for myself, and ended up kind of backfiring because it wasn't probably the best reflection of what was best for the people I was leading. And I think a way to kind of combat that is to actually get to know the people that you're leading. Leadership can be a very isolating place. And a lot of times, if you're not intentional about it, you can actually become very disconnected from the people that you're leading. And so I think it's crucial and it's vitally important to make sure that you know the people that you're leading and you know them well. And then another thing that I did later on in my leadership journey was actually to bring people alongside me to help me make those decisions. So one thing that I picked up in leadership is that you should always be looking for your next replacement. A ministry, an organization, a company that's built around you will fall when you leave. And it's so important that we make sure that if we want our legacy to last, if we want the impact of the ministry or the organization that we're leading to last, it's important that we find people that we can trust it to. And so it's really important to identify people that you see leadership potential in and bring them alongside in the journey with you, and even delegate responsibilities. Early on in my leadership journey, like, I felt I had to do everything. I felt I had to run the tech. I felt I had to make sure that, I was communicating, I was doing announcements. Like, I was so overwhelmed because I felt all of that weight on me. And I learned is that by delegating responsibilities and actually inviting people to lead certain parts of the ministry, it actually not only helped them become better leaders, but it helped the organization and the ministry get better, because there was more voices speaking into it. And so when it came time to make an important decision, I actually invited people. I called them my core team. They were a group of 5 to 6 people that I trusted as leaders in the ministry I was walking with personally. They were diverse. They had different giftings. They had different callings. They were, made up of men and women. They were made up of different ages, different careers, everything like that. And they actually helped me make some important decisions. I'd ask them, this is what we're thinking of, or this is what I'm thinking of. What do you think? And I actually found too that they were the most in tune with the temperature of the ministry, because they were the ones that were leading the small groups. They're the ones that were directly walking with a lot of these people. And so they were really advocates for the people. And it helped me to stay connected to, of really getting to know what's actually going on. And so when I'm making a vital decision, it helped me to stay informed and also take what they had to say into account.
That's incredible. And it just makes you be intentional, because you're right. A place of leadership is a place of isolation. If you're not careful, it doesn't have to be, right? But if you're not careful and you think this is on me and I have to do this and I have to lead and I have to carry it out, well, that's just not the reality. We see even in Jesus's circle, he had and delegated responsibilities to his disciples, and he was the ultimate leader, right? I mean,
absolutely.
He created everything. He is everything to us. He gives us life, all of this, but he still, while he was on earth, was delegating responsibilities. And even now today, while we're walking out our journey with Jesus, he has delegated responsibilities to each one of us. Like, he could ultimately come back in the clouds and say, hey, I'm Jesus. I died for the world. You guys need to follow me. And I don't think there would be very many people in the world that would say, nope, not going to follow that guy. Like, done. I'd be like in 100% if I wasn't a believer.
For sure.
But what he did was he delegated this responsibility to witness him to us so that he can have personal relationships through it. And so delegation is so important. And I think that's really cool. And you kind of got into this a little bit when you were talking about your high school pastor, and when you knew at a young age that you wanted to start leading. How did you know that, like, man, I want to be a leader? Like, what was it? Was there a moment? Was it a process?
For sure. And just, I want to go back to just one thing that you said too is, I was actually, that's crazy, because in like, when I was preparing to talk about this, I was actually thinking about Jesus and his disciples. And that's something that when I looked at what it meant to build a team, I actually looked at that exact of how Jesus did his ministry with his 12. Because if you think about it, his ministry on earth, he could have easily just walked around by himself and, done his miracles. He could have gone from town to town to town. He didn't need to bring 12 people alongside of him. He didn't need to invest, especially into Peter and James and John. And you look at it, and he literally chose Peter. Like, you look at all the mistakes, all the flaws that Peter had, and he said, I'm going to build my church on you. And that really is the success of the church, because Jesus knew that his time on earth, he wasn't going to be there forever. And so he had to find people that he could entrust it to. And so I think that's just so vitally important, is when you look at the fact that Jesus took these imperfect people, he saw something in them. He saw, who they could become. They weren't the leaders that they were supposed to be. Peter was definitely not ready to carry the church when he met Jesus, but Jesus brought him along and chose to begin to entrust him with things and teach him and walk with him. And after 3 years of that, then Peter was able to be entrusted with the bride of Christ, and so it's just so important. But Love
Yes.
that. I think it's so great. Yeah. If you ever want to learn more about just building teams, like literally look at how Jesus walked with his disciples, because
Yes.
that to me, he was the best team builder of all time by far.
Completely
He's best
agree.
of everything by far at all time.
Yeah, true. That's true.
But yeah, growing up, I always knew I wanted to be a leader. And again, like I said, I don't think I necessarily knew what that was. I was kind of the overachiever in school. I was kind of that know-it-all, like superstar, like wanted to be the best at everything. And it it was something that I felt like I was also a very bossy kid, like loved telling people what to do, loved telling my little brother what to do, like the poor guy. I just was so bossy growing up. And so I think I always had that like natural leadership inclination of just wanting to like take charge and be ahead of the game and be on top of it, but didn't really understand what that necessarily meant. And so I always said, I want to be a leader. I want to be a leader. I want to be a leader. So I knew that, but it took time to actually develop what true leadership meant for me. And so I think something that's important to remember is even if you feel called to leadership, it's an ongoing process to understand what leadership really means. Even now, I think there's things about leadership that I don't even understand. And I don't think, even though I had a good stint of 5 years in like a leadership role, and even though I may not necessarily be in a leadership role now, it's important that I continuously learn how to become a leader, because it's such a vast topic and it's something that I don't think anyone will ever arrive at, but it's important that we're committed to learning to understand what it is. And when I was 15, I was starting to serve in the church at a higher capacity, and I got to go on stage and, do the announcements for our high school ministry. And I felt like a big deal because, like 15, like, ooh. And, I was starting to kind of get more opportunities thrown my way in that ministry, and wasn't anticipating that, wasn't expecting it, but was just getting more opportunities to be on a platform, to be more public. And I remember sitting down and I was watching my pastor teach, and I literally felt like I actually like heard God say, like, this is what you're gonna do for the rest of your life. And at that time, I did not want to be in ministry. Like, I had plans to go to like Ivy League colleges. I wanted to go into engineering, make a lot of money. Thought that was unsuccessful. I thought that wasn't the direction my life was going. So when I heard that, I was very confused and a little arrogant at the time for sure. And I think even though I knew I wanted to be a leader, I haven't necessarily arrived at what it truly means to be a leader, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I appreciate that. I think the fact that you're acknowledging that there's never like an end destination shows how important it is and how much of a leader you truly are, because leaders are always learning. They're always growing. They're always developing. You hear the saying, leaders are readers. Some are for sure Audible listeners, they listen to Audible books. I'm not going to point fingers, but the last book I read was on Audible. But leaders are continually growing. They're continually learning. So before you stepped into this role as a young adult minister, even leading at the church, as you processed and thought about that, how important was it for you to begin to lead yourself well?
Yeah, that is like such a good topic, honestly. I think that one thing that's really important when you're in a leadership role is to make sure that your private life exceeds your public life. I have unfortunately seen a lot just being around in the church for a long time. And even just, walking with some of my peers who are in leadership roles, I've seen a lot of people who got elevated to platforms that they weren't ready for. And it wasn't because they weren't talented. It wasn't because they weren't gifted. Like, the leaders that were over them, they saw how great their public life was. They saw how gifted they were, how committed they were, how talented they were, and easily they were promotable. So their talent got them there, but it's their character that couldn't keep up. And so I think it's so vitally important that you learn how to lead yourself before you ever step into a position where you're leading other people. Because there are moments where you're going to be tested. There's moments where you're going to have to make hard decisions. And eventually, you know, it says in scripture, right? Whatever's hidden in the darkness will eventually come to light. And so if you're not spending time, just easy enough. If you're not spending time in God's word daily, if you are not feeding yourself daily, you're not going to have anything to give to people to feed them publicly. You're just not.
Yeah.
And when you're pouring out and you're calling this person and walking them through what they're going through, and then you're attending this meeting, and then you're going on stage to preach in a few hours, and then you have to stay afterwards and you have to, you know, talk to someone who's going through a really hard time, or there's a moral sin issue that's going on with one of your leaders. Like you're constantly just giving and giving and giving and giving, and you have to receive fresh revelation from God's word. You have to be getting poured into from God himself, because if you have nothing to give, not going to have anything to give you. One thing that I try to think of it as like a drain versus a bucket. You know, you want to be a bucket. You don't want to have a hole at the bottom. You want to be filling yourself up so that you can overflow and you can pour out onto other people. When you have a hole at the bottom and you're like a drain, all it is it's going in and it's coming out, and there's nothing for you to fill yourself up with. And so I just think it's vitally important that you make sure that your public life or your private life is ready for your public life. And so you do that by reading scripture. You do that by feeding yourself. You do that by finding friends that are walking with you and pouring into you. Find that by getting a mentor. You are never too old. You are never too far to get a mentor.
I love that.
Yeah. And I think there were seasons where I felt like I was above that, or I felt like, you know, there wasn't anyone that I felt like could like lead me or understand me. But humility is so important too, like when you're a leader, and just understanding that you're on a journey and you need to find someone who's further along the journey than you are to be able to help guide you into becoming a better leader yourself.
That's so good. That's so good. And honestly, that really covers this last questions, I think, but I want you to go a little bit deeper into it, if you would. You landed on finding a leader to help you along the journey. And I feel like maybe it's not, but I feel like that's one of the most important pieces to becoming a leader. Someone who wants to become a leader, find somebody who's doing what you think God's called you to do, and then lean into that. So how do you go about, you know, asking somebody to be your mentor for you specifically? How did you go about that?
Yeah. I was always very fortunate where I found myself under amazing leaders, you know, and I think that was kind of God's like just blessing on me, because like I mentioned before, there were a couple times where my pride got in the way, and it felt awkward, or it felt uncomfortable, or it was like, I don't want to like waste your time. And so there were seasons where I just kind of had mentors given to me. You know, they were like my bosses at my staff job at the church, or they were like my small group leaders. And so kind of early on, I was really fortunate with that. But I think, honestly, I think the thing that we often forget is actually that there's a lot of older leaders that are looking to pour into people. I think sometimes we're so afraid that they're too busy, that they don't want to walk with us. But really, a lot of older leaders, they actually want someone to share their wisdom with, because what I've gained from leadership in like my few years being in that is I've made a lot of mistakes as a leader. And it was actually my failures that have made me the leader that I am. It was more my failures than my successes, because my failures taught me so much. And so leaders who have been on this journey for 20, 30, 40 years, they have a lot of successes, but they also have a lot of failures, and they have a lot of wisdom to share. And the thing about wisdom is you can gain all this wisdom, but if you have no one to share it to, who's it going to build? And so I think a lot of times we think, you know, I don't want to ask them, like they have a lot on their plate. And the worst thing that they can say is no.
Yeah,
you know?
That's true.
It's the worst thing that they can say is no. They're not going to be offended. They're not going to, actually, I think in a lot of ways they'd be flattered, you know, for someone to be like, hey, I see this in you. You are the kind of person that I'm looking to become. You're the kind of person I want to learn from. That's actually a huge form of honor. And so even if they don't have the capacity to walk with you, it's actually being respecting and honoring to actually come to someone and say, I would love for you to mentor me. And the best thing that they can say is yes. And so it's taking the fear out of they're going to feel like weird or offended about it if you ask them, because the worst thing they can say is no. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably because they just have a lot on their plate, but they might have someone in their circle or someone that they're walking with that actually might be someone that you could come under for them to be your mentor. So they might even be able to point you in a direction of someone who is very similar to them or walks in the same circle as them and could come under you in that way.
Yeah, that's really good. I know that me personally, when I was actually at Missions.me, I had a problem with asking the guys that were there to take time for coffee. I'd ask like a couple times a month, maybe once or twice a month, and then it's like, oh well, they have a family and they're busy and I don't want to pull them away from that. And the thing is, they'll just tell you no if they can't. Like, they're not gonna do it to offend you or hurt your feelings. And they're doing it because they know their balance and they know what they can say yes to and what they can say no to and how to carry that. And so I think that that's important for us to understand, is just because you're getting a no from a leader doesn't mean that they're saying no forever. It means maybe no in this season, but now that you've acknowledged them and said, hey, this is something that I'd like, as their schedules get busier, because trying to ask Dominic to be in meetings with anyone really right before a One Nation One Day or a One Day LA, he's probably going to have to say no. But maybe in September, he might be able to say, because of the way his schedule is working, the way that things are building to a certain extent in certain seasons, certain times, and that happens with all leaders. It's just when is it available? There's going to be times where they're more available. There's going to be times where they're less available, but there's always time for you to ask the question. Like you said, the worst thing they can say is no. So I appreciate that. And before I let you go here, I would love one piece of encouragement for everybody. Anything, the gamut, can be about leadership, can be about whatever you want.
I think if there was one thing I wish I could have told myself when I first stepped in and just felt so overwhelmed and paralyzed, honestly, by fear, is I would say just don't be afraid to fail. There were so many times where I was stuck in indecisiveness because I thought, what if I make the wrong decision, or what if I fail, or what if I let people down? And as a leader, like you feel that responsibility. And failure doesn't make you a bad leader. It actually builds you to become a better one if you let it. Right? It can be a building block. It can be a growing moment. And actually, it's a lot easier to fail when you're in lower level leadership positions than when you're on a larger platform. Right? You look at some of these people who lead churches of thousands of people, and if they have a public failure or if they make a wrong decision, it's way more in the spotlight. When you're just starting out in leadership and you're not entirely sure what you're doing or, what direction you should go, there's so much more grace to fail. And honestly, it helps you to learn. It helps you to grow. Like I said earlier, I learned more about leadership from my failures than I did from my successes. And my failures actually brought me to my successes, because I would try something and it didn't work. But there was also seasons where I was so paralyzed by fear of failing that I didn't do anything. And what that did is it made me ineffective. I think if you let the fear of failure stop you from acting, it actually just makes you an ineffective leader. And that's how the enemy tries to discourage you. That's how the enemy tries to take you out of the game, as he just says over and over and over again, is what if you fail? What if you mess up? The beautiful thing about being a leader in God's kingdom is there's so much grace, and I found too, leadership is more about who you are than what you do. My team members that I walked with, some of them are still my very best friends, and the core team I was talking about, the ones that I really brought in to help me lead a ministry, they're some of my very best friends. And, you know, we didn't start out as best friends. They became my best friends because they walked in a leadership journey with me, and they saw me in more vulnerable places than other people did. And they also saw me fail a lot, but they never held that against me. They never were cruel against me. If anything, like, they wanted to help me make the ministry successful because they knew who I was, and they knew my heartbeat, and they knew the authenticity that I gave them, and how much I cared for them, and how much I cared for the people that I led. And so fear of failure is really just a tactic from the enemy to get you to stop trying and get you out of the game. And so the worst thing that you can do is to tap out just because you're afraid you might fail.
That's really good. That's really good. Skyler, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time. I appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to Disney when I come.
Yes, I'm so ready.
Intentionally when it opens back up so we can get there.
Yes, absolutely.
Hopefully you have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, that encouragement at the end, the fear of failure paralyzes you. Don't be afraid to fail. So encouraging. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Have a
thank
great
you.
day.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on More Than Mondays. I hope that conversation encouraged you, challenged you, and maybe shifted some of your perspective as it comes to leadership. Remember to like and subscribe so that you can get our new episodes every Monday at 8 a.m.